You're telling me that you, a species that managed to blow up half your own moon in what you call a weapons testing mishap, don't bring armed security to diplomatic meetings? Ambassador Skantier's upper appendages quivered in what humans had come to recognize as Valkyrie disbelief. Even the Flaxians bring ceremonial venom sacs, and they're basically sentient sea cucumbers. Lieutenant James Cooper stood at parade rest behind Ambassador Elaine Mitchell, his face a perfect mask of neutrality despite the alien's incredulous tone. 4 years of training at the Diplomatic Protection Corps, and 3 years of field experience, had taught him the art of becoming part of the furniture. Present but unnoticed unless needed. The human philosophy of diplomatic protection is different, Ambassador Mitchell replied with the practiced smile of someone who'd had this conversation at least 50 times before. We believe that visible weapons at a negotiating table create an atmosphere of distrust. But surely you don't expect us to believe your guards are unarmed, the Valkyrie ambassador pressed, all 4 of his eyes narrowing to slits. Mitchell's smile didn't waver. I didn't say they were unarmed. I said they don't carry visible weapons. Cooper kept his eyes forward, maintaining his statue-like posture. He knew better than to react to being discussed as if he weren't in the room. That was part of the job, being simultaneously hyper-visible as the only other human in the room and completely ignored during discussions. Guard-shaped furniture, as the DPC training sergeants like to say. The Valkyrie made a whistling sound through his spiracles, their equivalent of a dismissive snort. Semantics. Hidden weapons are still weapons. Mitchell placed her datapad on the polished crystal table between them. Perhaps we should move on to the trade agreement details. I believe Section 3 had some points of contention regarding mineral rights in the Proxima system. And just like that, the conversation pivoted. Cooper had always admired the ambassador's ability to redirect diplomatic conversations without seeming evasive. It was a skill he'd never mastered himself, which was one of many reasons he stood behind the negotiating table instead of sitting at it. As the meeting droned on, Cooper's mind wandered to his morning briefing. Intelligence had flagged unusual movement patterns from 3 known operatives of the Orion Syndicate on the station. Nothing concrete enough to justify canceling the meeting, but enough to raise the threat assessment from green to yellow. The Galactic Council Neutral Zone Station, or GalNut as humans had inevitably nicknamed it, was supposed to be exactly what its name suggested: neutral ground. A massive rotating habitat where diplomatic corps from over 70 spacefaring civilizations could meet without fear of violence or coercion. In theory, anyway. In practice, there were always groups who saw high-level diplomatic gatherings as opportunities rather than peace-building exercises. The Orion Syndicate was just one of many criminal enterprises that had expanded into multiple systems alongside legitimate interstellar commerce. Cooper's attention snapped back to the present as Ambassador Skantier's translator made a sharp electronic squeal, a sound it only made when the Valkyrie was speaking in their language's agitated tonal range. Absolutely unacceptable. You claim these asteroid belts were unclaimed when your mining corporations arrived, yet Valkyrie stellar charts have clearly marked them as resource exploration zones for over 40 of your Earth years. Here we go again, Cooper thought. This particular diplomatic dance had been ongoing for months. The Valkyrie claimed territory by charting it in their navigation systems. Humans claimed territory by actually showing up and using it. The fundamental disconnect had created tension in 3 different star systems already. The ambassador's shoulders tensed slightly. A tell Cooper had learned meant she was losing patience but trying not to show it. Ambassador Skantier, with all due respect, the Galactic Council's Charter of Interstellar Resource Rights clearly states that charting alone does not constitute a territorial claim. There must be regular presence or resource development activity within a 10-year period. Those are human interpretations of the Charter. The Valkyrie ambassador's upper appendages were now vibrating so rapidly they were almost a blur. Written by humans and their client species. Client species. Cooper winced internally. That particular phrase had triggered at least 2 diplomatic incidents in the past year alone. The implication that Earth's allies were somehow subservient rather than equal partners was a guaranteed way to derail any productive conversation. Ambassador Mitchell's back straightened a fraction more. I believe we should take a brief recess before continuing this discussion. Her tone was pleasant, but carried the unmistakable chill that experienced diplomats recognized as a warning sign. As Mitchell stood, Cooper seamlessly moved to pull back her chair, then positioned himself to follow exactly 3 steps behind her as they exited the conference room. Standard protection distance, close enough to react to any threat, far enough not to crowd. The moment the door sealed behind them, Mitchell's diplomatic mask slipped. I swear by all that's holy, If he calls our allies client species one more time, I'm going to suggest that perhaps the Valkyrie Confederation's chronic resource shortages might be solved by actually visiting star systems instead of just drawing pictures of them. She exhaled sharply through her nose. Cooper allowed himself a small smile now that they were alone in the transit corridor. Would you like me to accidentally spill something on his ceremonial robes, ma'am? Mitchell snorted, then composed herself. Tempting, but no. The Valkyrie consider their diplomatic garments to be extensions of their body. It would be like offering to stab him a little. Just enough to make him more reasonable, Cooper deadpanned. The ambassador laughed, the tension visibly draining from her shoulders. This is why I requested you for this assignment, Cooper. You know exactly when I need inappropriate humor. They continued down the corridor toward the human diplomatic suite, nodding politely to a pair of Tellurian diplomats passing in the opposite direction. All willowy beings whose skin seemed to shimmer with bioluminescent patterns that supposedly reflected their emotional states. Currently, they were pulsing a soft blue that the cultural briefings had identified as respectful acknowledgement. As they approached the entrance to the human diplomatic quarter, Cooper's subdermal communicator vibrated against his wrist bone in a specific pattern. 3 short pulses, 1 long, a priority message from security ops. He subtly tapped his temple, activating his ocular implant's message display. Orbital security breach. Unknown vessel docked at maintenance port C7. 3 unauthorized entities entered station. Signature match, Orion Syndicate. Station security compromised. Diplomatic quarter lockdown initiated. Cooper's entire demeanor shifted in an instant. Ambassador, we have a situation, he said quietly, moving closer to her and slightly adjusting their course toward a service corridor. I need to get you to a secure location immediately. To her credit, Mitchell didn't ask questions or protest. She'd been through enough security drills to know that Cooper's tone meant this wasn't a drill. She simply nodded and let him guide her with a light touch on her elbow. Station security has been compromised, he explained in a low voice as they moved. Orion Syndicate operators have boarded. Given their usual MO, they're likely after high-value diplomatic targets for ransom or leverage. Like Valkyrie mining rights negotiators? Mitchell's mind was already connecting the dots. Exactly. You're valuable because of what you know and who you represent. Cooper led them through a maintenance access point, his palm print overriding the standard security protocols. The Diplomatic Protection Corps had insisted on having their own security overrides installed throughout the station, a demand that had initially offended the station administrators but was now proving its worth. As the service door slid shut behind them, the main corridor lights suddenly dimmed to emergency levels, and a calm, multi-language announcement began cycling through the station's communication system. Attention! Station security protocols have been compromised. All diplomatic personnel, please return to your designated quarters and engage security measures. This is not a drill. Security teams are responding. The message repeated in Valkyrie, Tellurian, Flaxian, and at least a dozen other languages Cooper couldn't identify. They're locking down the entire diplomatic quarter, Mitchell observed as they hurried through the narrow maintenance corridor. That's going to create chaos. Cooper nodded grimly. And chaos creates opportunity for whoever planned this. The service corridors will get us back to our secure suite without going through the main concourse. They moved quickly through the utilitarian passageway, designed for maintenance drones and occasional human technicians rather than diplomatic foot traffic. The lighting was harsh and industrial, casting sharp shadows as they navigated around conduits and junction boxes. Cooper's mind was rapidly cycling through security scenarios. The human diplomatic suite had been designed with multiple redundant security measures. Biometric locks, hardened walls, independent life support, and communication systems. Standard protocol was to reach the safe room and wait for the all-clear from station security or extraction by DPC tactical teams if necessary. But something about this didn't feel right. The Orion Syndicate was opportunistic and profit-driven, not suicidal. Attacking a Galactic Council station was several orders of magnitude beyond their usual operations. The political blowback would be enormous, and any ransom they might hope to collect wouldn't be worth the coordinated response from multiple species security forces. Unless ransoming diplomats wasn't the objective. Cooper was so deep in analysis that he almost missed the slight vibration under his feet. A barely perceptible tremor that wouldn't have registered if he hadn't spent the last 3 years living on space stations and ships. "Down!" he shouted, tackling Ambassador Mitchell as the maintenance corridor behind them erupted in a controlled explosion. The blast was designed to breach but not catastrophically damage the station. Small comfort as debris peppered Cooper's back and a wave of hot air washed over them. Through the ringing in his ears, Cooper heard the distinctive high-pitched whine of Arcturian pulse weapons. favored by mercenaries and black market operators for their ability to temporarily disrupt synthetic neural systems without causing permanent biological damage. Perfect for kidnappers who wanted their targets alive but compliant. Cooper pulled Mitchell to her feet and pushed her ahead of him. "Move. We need to reach Junction B9. There's an emergency shelter access point there." As they ran, Cooper reached into his jacket and extracted what appeared to be an ordinary stylus. With a practiced motion, he twisted the barrel, and the device expanded into a compact baton about 40 centimeters long. Mitchell glanced back, eyebrow raised despite their situation. "I thought those were ceremonial." "The visible ones are," Cooper replied grimly. "This one's functional." They reached a T-junction in the maintenance corridor. Cooper paused, listening intently for pursuit. The sound of boots on metal grating was growing closer. "Ambassador, when we reach the shelter, you need to initiate Protocol Black Box. Full communication blackout except for emergency beacons." Cooper kept his voice steady and professional despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. Mitchell nodded, her expression grim. "You don't think this is a simple kidnapping attempt?" It wasn't a question, but Cooper answered anyway. "The Syndicate doesn't have the resources or the insanity to hit a council station without serious backing. Someone's using them as proxies, and whoever it is, they want something bigger than ransom money." A pulse round impacted the wall near Cooper's head, sending sparks cascading over his shoulder. He pushed Mitchell around the corner and raised his baton, pressing a recessed button on the handle. The tip began to glow with a faint blue light. "Keep going," he instructed. "Second right, then immediate left. The shelter entrance is behind a green access panel." Mitchell hesitated. "Lieutenant, that's an order, Ambassador." Cooper's voice was firm. "I'll be right behind you." As Mitchell reluctantly continued down the corridor, Cooper pressed his back against the wall and waited. The footsteps grew louder, accompanied by the sound of someone speaking in the distinctive clicking language of the Vkr'lak, a reptilian species known for their work as mercenaries and bounty hunters. Cooper took a deep breath, centered himself, and then moved in one fluid motion. He stepped around the corner, baton raised, directly into the path of two armored figures. Before they could react, he thrust the baton forward, touching it to the chest plate of the first attacker. The blue glow intensified momentarily as the device discharged its payload, a focused electromagnetic pulse designed to temporarily disable most powered armor systems. The first mercenary's suit locked up instantly, servos freezing in place, leaving them trapped in a rigid standing position. The second attacker, a bulky Vkr'lak whose scales gleamed dully under the emergency lighting, reacted with impressive speed. They dropped their pulse rifle and extended wickedly curved claws from specialized gauntlets, an adaptation to the DPC's known anti-electronic countermeasures. "Smart," Cooper acknowledged before launching into motion again. The Vkr'lak slashed with frightening speed, but Cooper had spent hundreds of hours training specifically for close-quarters combat with various species. He knew that while Vkr'lak were incredibly strong and had natural armor in their scales, they had limited rotational flexibility in their spine and relatively poor peripheral vision. He ducked under the first slash and circled rapidly to the mercenary's side, striking precisely at the junction between armor plates where he knew Vkr'lak scales were thinner to allow for mobility. The baton, now functioning as a simple impact weapon, connected with a dull thud. The Vkr'lak hissed in pain but didn't go down. Cooper hadn't expected it to. Vkr'lak were notoriously difficult to incapacitate. But the strike had achieved its purpose, forcing the mercenary to turn awkwardly to track Cooper's movement. What followed was a brief, brutal exchange of strikes and counters. Cooper used his smaller size and greater flexibility to stay just outside the Vkr'lak's optimal strike range, looking for another opening. The mercenary grew increasingly frustrated, its movements becoming less controlled and more power-focused. Exactly what Cooper had been waiting for. When the Vkr'lak overextended on a particularly vicious swipe, Cooper stepped inside its guard and drove the baton upward in a precise strike to the underside of the mercenary's jaw, one of the few spots where Vkr'lak's nervous systems were close enough to the surface to be vulnerable to impact. The mercenary's eyes rolled back, and it crumpled to the deck with a heavy thud. Cooper didn't waste time admiring his handiwork. He quickly retrieved the fallen pulse rifle, disabled its biometric lock with another application of his baton's EMP function, and continued after Ambassador Mitchell. He found her exactly where she should have been, at the emergency shelter entrance, having already bypassed the access panel and initiated the opening sequence. The reinforced door was sliding open with deliberate slowness, revealing a small but secure room beyond. "That wasn't right behind me," Mitchell observed dryly as Cooper approached, eyeing the pulse rifle in his hands. "Had to pick up some equipment," he replied. ushering her into the shelter. "Once you're inside, I need you to—" The rest of his sentence was cut off by a deafening roar as a section of the ceiling above them exploded inward. Cooper instinctively threw himself over Mitchell as chunks of metal and insulation rained down. Through the newly created hole descended 3 figures on rapid deployment cables. 2 humans and what appeared to be a Tellurian, all wearing the distinctive charcoal gray armor of high-end mercenary outfits. Cooper raised the pulse rifle and managed to get off 2 shots, catching one of the humans in the shoulder and causing them to spin awkwardly on their descent cable. But the other 2 landed smoothly, weapons already drawn. "Ambassador Mitchell," the lead human called, his voice distorted through his helmet's speaker system. "We're not here to harm you. We simply need you to come with us and answer some questions about the Proxima negotiations." Cooper positioned himself between Mitchell and the mercenaries, pulse rifle aimed steadily. "That's not going to happen." The mercenary leader tilted his head slightly. "Lieutenant Cooper, isn't it? Diplomatic Protection Corps. Your file says you're good, but not good enough to take all 3 of us with a weapon you picked up 30 seconds ago." "Maybe," Cooper agreed. "But I only need to be good enough to ensure you don't leave with the ambassador." The leader sighed, the sound strangely mechanical through the helmet. "We're professionals here. No one needs to die today. We extract the ambassador. She answers some questions for our employer. She returns unharmed within 48 hours. Standard corporate intelligence gathering." Mitchell spoke up from behind Cooper. "If your employer wants information about the negotiations, there are legal channels to request briefings." "Legal channels don't provide real-time strategic intelligence, Ambassador," the leader replied smoothly. "Now, shall we dispense with the standoff? My team has disabled the station's internal security systems, and the nearest response force is at least 15 minutes out. Coming with us is the logical choice." Cooper kept the rifle steady. "Ambassador Mitchell is under the protection of Earth Diplomatic Corps. Any attempt to remove her from station jurisdiction constitutes an act of kidnapping, piracy, and potentially an act of war depending on who you're working for." The Tellurian mercenary made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Always so dramatic, you humans. It's just business." "Last chance," the leader said, his weapon unwavering. "The hard way gets messy." Cooper felt Mitchell's hand on his shoulder, a signal they had established during their first deployment together. He knew what it meant without looking back. "I trust your judgment." "The hard way, then," Cooper said quietly. What happened next occurred so rapidly that later, when station security reviewed the footage, they had to slow it down to fully understand the sequence of events. Cooper dropped to one knee, simultaneously triggering something in his left sleeve. His suit jacket, specially designed by DPC Technical Division, suddenly stiffened as embedded reactive polymers activated, creating an impromptu ballistic shield that covered most of his torso and the ambassador behind him. The mercenaries opened fire immediately, but instead of using lethal ammunition, they fired darts, likely loaded with fast-acting sedatives. Several bounced off Cooper's hardened jacket, while he returned fire with the pulse rifle, forcing the mercenaries to scatter. In the moment of confusion, Cooper's right hand moved to his tie clip and twisted it sharply. The small device emitted a concentrated sonic pulse calibrated to the specific frequency known to disorient human inner ear function without affecting most non-human species. Both human mercenaries staggered, temporarily losing balance and coordination. The Tellurian, unaffected, continued firing with remarkable accuracy despite the chaos. Cooper felt a sharp sting as one of the darts found its mark in his exposed neck. He knew he had seconds at most before whatever compound they were using took effect. With deliberate calm, he reached into his breast pocket and removed what appeared to be an ordinary handkerchief. With a sharp flick of his wrist, he sent it flying toward the Tellurian. Mid-air, the fabric suddenly stiffened and expanded, revealing itself to be a compressed capture net threaded with paralytic contact agents specifically formulated for Tellurian physiology. The net enveloped the alien mercenary, who immediately began convulsing as the paralytic compounds took effect through their more permeable skin. Cooper's vision was already beginning to blur as the sedative entered his system. With his remaining coordination, he activated his final defensive measure, pressing his palm flat against the floor panel beside him, where his handprint triggered the emergency shelter's override protocol. The shelter door, which had remained partially open during the confrontation, suddenly slammed shut with Ambassador Mitchell safely inside, leaving Cooper outside with the mercenaries. As consciousness began to fade, Cooper heard the shelter's internal systems engaging, reinforced barricades, communication blackout, and the distinctive hiss of independent life support activating. Mitchell would be safe until help arrived. The leader of the mercenary team approached Cooper as he slumped against the wall, fighting to remain conscious. "Impressive," the man said, genuine professional appreciation in his voice. Unarmed diplomatic protection, my ass. You're basically a walking arsenal of non-lethal weaponry. Cooper managed a pained smile despite the sedative coursing through his system. That's the point. The point of what? Why we don't carry guns. Cooper's words were becoming slurred. Don't need them. We're weapons enough. That was the last thing Lieutenant James Cooper remembered before darkness claimed him. When Cooper regained consciousness, he was surprised to find himself not in a mercenary ship or black site interrogation room, but in the medical bay of Galnut Station. Even more surprising was the collection of faces gathered around his bed. Ambassador Mitchell, looking tired but unharmed. Captain Reynolds of Station Security, and most unexpectedly, Ambassador Zikantir of the Valkyrie Confederation. Welcome back, Lieutenant, Mitchell said with a warm smile. You've been the talk of the station for the past 16 hours. Cooper tried to sit up, wincing as his body reminded him of his recent activities. 16 hours? The mercenaries? Apprehended, along with their Orion Syndicate contractors, Captain Reynolds assured him. After you secured the ambassador in the emergency shelter, Station Security finally managed to bypass the systems they had compromised. We found you unconscious and them trying to breach the shelter. They surrendered rather promptly once our full security contingent arrived. Cooper frowned, his tactical mind already working through the implications. Their employer? That, Ambassador Zikantir interjected, his upper appendages making what Cooper recognized as a gesture of respect, is where matters become interesting. The mercenaries were hired through a complex network of shell corporations that ultimately trace back to the Valkyrie Trade Authority. Cooper blinked in surprise, looking between the Valkyrie ambassador and Mitchell. Not by my government, Zikantir clarified quickly, but by a faction within our mining consortium that stood to lose significantly if the negotiations over the Proxima system went, as they now have. Mitchell stepped in. While you were unconscious, Ambassador Zikantir and I reached a mutual understanding about the Proxima situation. The attempted kidnapping actually accelerated our negotiations. Nothing like a shared enemy to create diplomatic breakthroughs, Zikantir added, his translator rendering his tone as wryly amused. Captain Reynolds nodded. The Galactic Council Security Committee has opened a formal investigation into the breach. There will likely be significant revisions to station security protocols after this incident. Cooper absorbed this information, then turned to Ambassador Mitchell. The shelter worked as designed then? Perfectly, she confirmed. Though I have to say your interpretation of right behind me leaves something to be desired. That earned a small laugh from Cooper, followed by a wince as his bruised ribs protested. Ambassador Zikantir's upper appendages made a complex gesture that his translator didn't attempt to interpret. Lieutenant Cooper, I owe you a significant debt of personal honor. My government would have been irrevocably damaged if the rogue elements of our trade authority had succeeded in their plan. Cooper nodded respectfully. Just doing my job, Ambassador. About that, the Valkyrie continued, all four eyes fixed on Cooper with unnerving intensity. I must admit to having fundamentally misunderstood the human approach to diplomatic security. Mitchell smiled. Ambassador Zikantir has been quite impressed by the DPC's methods, particularly after reviewing the security footage of your confrontation. When we spoke during our negotiation, you claimed your guards carried no weapons, Zikantir said, addressing Mitchell but looking at Cooper. I now understand this was not semantic trickery but a profound philosophical difference. Your guards do not carry weapons because they are weapons. Highly trained individuals whose entire bodies and seemingly ordinary accessories are in fact sophisticated defensive systems. Cooper shrugged slightly. The philosophy goes back centuries on Earth. The best weapon is one the adversary doesn't recognize until it's too late. Indeed. Zikantir's upper appendages rippled in what Cooper now recognized as admiration. Your equipment contains no obvious weapons, yet your tie clip emits targeted sonic disruptors, your handkerchief deploys paralytic compounds, your jacket becomes armor, and even your writing implements conceal defensive capabilities. All non-lethal, Cooper pointed out. DPC doctrine prioritizes protection over elimination. Our primary goal is always to create enough time and space for the protectee to reach safety, not to kill threats. A distinction that many species, including my own, have failed to appreciate fully, Zikantir acknowledged. We have always seen the absence of visible weapons as weakness, when in fact it represents a different kind of strength, the confidence of a predator who knows they need no obvious displays of threat. Ambassador Mitchell smiled diplomatically. I wouldn't characterize humans as predators exactly, Ambassador. Would you not? Skantier's translator conveyed genuine curiosity. Your evolutionary history suggests otherwise. Most species evolved intelligence as prey, developing cognitive abilities to avoid being eaten. Humans evolved intelligence as pursuit predators who could outthink and outlast their quarry. Your diplomatic core reflects this heritage: patience, tactical thinking, and the ability to appear harmless until the precise moment action becomes necessary. Cooper exchanged a glance with Mitchell, who looked as though she wasn't sure whether to be flattered or concerned by this assessment. Captain Reynolds cleared his throat. On that somewhat unsettling note, I should return to the security center. Lieutenant Cooper, the medical staff says you'll be cleared for duty within 48 hours. Ambassador Mitchell has recommended you for the Galactic Council's Order of Distinguished Service. First human recipient, I believe. After Reynolds departed, Skantir made a formal gesture of departure. I too must attend to matters of state. The Trade Authority requires significant restructuring after this incident. At the door, the Valkyrie ambassador paused. Lieutenant Cooper, a final observation if I may. Many species join the Galactic Council carrying ceremonial or actual weapons to project strength. Humans join carrying no visible weapons, yet prove more formidable than most. It is educative. After the Valkyrie departed, Mitchell sat on the edge of Cooper's bed, her diplomatic mask dropping now that they were alone. You scared the hell out of me, James, she said quietly. Sorry about that, he replied with a small smile. Next time I'll try to stay conscious during the dramatic last stand. Mitchell shook her head, not sharing his humor. The shelter was designed for 2 people. You were supposed to be inside with me. Tactically unsound, Cooper replied, his voice softening. I needed to create a delay to ensure the shelter's security protocols fully engaged. If they had gotten to the door a few seconds earlier. I know, she sighed. I've already reviewed the security analysis with Captain Reynolds. Your actions were textbook DPC procedure. Doesn't mean I have to like it. Cooper's expression turned serious. How severe are the diplomatic repercussions going to be? Surprisingly minimal, thanks to Ambassador Skantir's cooperation. The Valkyrie government is officially treating this as an internal criminal matter, rather than a diplomatic incident. They're actually using it as leverage to push through some regulatory reforms they've been wanting to implement in their mining sector. Politics, Cooper observed dryly. Always opportunistic. Says the man who turned a handkerchief into a weapon of war. Of peacekeeping, he corrected with a smile. Mitchell stood and straightened her jacket, a gesture Cooper had come to recognize as her transitioning back into ambassador mode. Rest up, Lieutenant. We have a revised negotiation schedule starting in 3 days, and I'd prefer to have my walking arsenal of non-lethal peacekeeping back on duty by then. Yes, ma'am, Cooper replied, falling easily back into professional formality. Though I should requisition some replacements for the equipment I used. Diplomatic security gets twitchy when we're below optimal loadout. Mitchell paused at the door, a mischievous smile playing at her lips. I've already submitted the requisition forms, including a request for that new sonic disruptor tie-clip prototype they've been testing. Figured you earned an equipment upgrade. After she left, Cooper settled back against the pillows, feeling the aches and strains of his encounter. The medical bay's viewport offered a spectacular view of the swirling blue-green nebula that surrounded Galnut Station, a peaceful scene belying the station's current state of heightened security and diplomatic tension. He thought about Ambassador Skantir's parting observation. The Valkyrie wasn't wrong. Humans did approach interstellar diplomacy differently than most species. Where others displayed strength overtly, humans preferred to project approachability while maintaining capability in reserve. It wasn't deception exactly. More like a different concept of what constituted strength. Not the ability to threaten, but the confidence not to need to. As Cooper drifted towards sleep, lulled by the medical bay's soft monitoring beeps and the lingering effects of whatever counteragent they'd given him for the mercenaries' sedative, he reflected that perhaps this was humanity's greatest contribution to galactic diplomacy. The radical notion that the most powerful person in the room might be the one who appears to be unarmed. That and really clever weaponized neckties. Some lessons, it seemed, could only be taught by example. Doc! Where? I don't see any what? The projectile whistled through the air where Krill's head had been microseconds earlier, before Captain Alexis Torres yanked the Quillian ambassador down by his ceremonial collar. The metal sphere embedded itself in the wall behind them with a sickening thunk. That kind of duck, Torres muttered, scanning the crowded diplomatic reception hall. The something's about to turn your fancy little head into abstract art kind. Krill's translucent inner eyelids fluttered rapidly, the Quillian equivalent of a human's wide-eyed shock. How did you... I didn't even hear it coming. Yeah, well, that's kind of our thing. Torres tapped her earpiece. Security breach in the Galactic Embassy reception hall. Attempted assassination of the Quillian ambassador. Sweep the northwest corner, behind the ridiculous ice sculpture of Admiral Vkr'lak. From across the room, Lieutenant Jackson Daniels, who had absolutely heard enough jokes about his name to last several lifetimes, caught Torres's eye and gave an almost imperceptible nod. 20 seconds later, the would-be assassin was face down on the polished marble floor with Jackson's knee firmly planted between their shoulder blades. Just another Tuesday in the Interspecies Diplomatic Corps. Admiral Ulara sighed heavily, his 4 sets of arms arranged in the formal, I'm disappointed but not surprised configuration that every species somehow managed to recognize. Captain Torres, this is the 3rd diplomatic incident this month. Torres sat ramrod straight in her chair, dress uniform impeccable despite the chaos from 2 hours earlier. With all due respect, Admiral, I'd argue that preventing an assassination isn't causing a diplomatic incident, it's preventing one. The Vkr'lak delegation is demanding an apology. They claim your, what was the phrase? Unnecessarily aggressive human combat reflexes created an atmosphere of hostility. Torres blinked. They tried to kill Ambassador Krill. They claim it was a ceremonial greeting object. That ceremonial greeting object was traveling at roughly 300 meters per second and contained enough toxin to kill everyone in that room twice over. The Admiral's upper right hand rubbed his temple. The Vkr'lak delegation claims the toxin is simply their cultural perfume. Their cultural perfume is weaponized botulinum derivative? Captain Torres, you know as well as I do that the Galactic Council is walking a diplomatic tightrope. Humanity is still the new kid on the block, and half the species out there are still convinced you're all violent monkeys with delusions of grandeur. Torres bit her tongue, literally, to keep from pointing out that the Vkr'lak had evolved from something remarkably similar to Earth's banana slugs, so perhaps the monkey comments could be set aside. So what would you have had me do? Let Ambassador Krill get his brains splattered across the punch bowl? Torres asked. Perhaps a more measured response. The Vkr'lak representative is in the medical bay with 3 broken appendages. Lieutenant Daniels exercised appropriate restraint. The Vkr'lak have 17 appendages. Breaking only 3 strikes me as remarkable self-control. Admiral Ulara's 4-eyed blink was slow and deliberate. The Council has assigned a cultural liaison to your team to help smooth over these misunderstandings. Torres felt her stomach drop. Sir, my team doesn't need... This isn't a request, Captain. Dr. Vkr'lak will join you tomorrow. They're a xenoanthropologist specializing in human behavior. They've spent the last 15 years studying why humans react the way they do. So they're basically an alien that studies humans like we're some kind of fascinating lab experiment? That's a rather uncharitable way to describe the Galactic Council's leading expert on human psychology. Forgive me if I don't love the idea of being psychoanalyzed by someone with tentacles. Dr. Vkr'lak is Ardelian. They have cilia, not tentacles. That's not the point, sir. The point, Captain Torres, is that humanity needs allies in the Galactic Council. We need species who understand why humans instinctively throw themselves into danger. Why your first response to a threat is to neutralize it rather than flee or negotiate. Dr. Vkr'lak believes humans are not innately violent, that your reactions stem from something else entirely. I suggest you let them prove that theory correct. Torres exhaled slowly. Yes, sir. When can we expect Dr. Vkr'lak? They've already arrived. In fact, they observed the entire incident today. Torres straightened. They were at the reception? Indeed. Their initial assessment was, and I quote, fascinating. Somehow, Torres didn't find that reassuring at all. You reacted 0.38 seconds before the projectile was even visible to most species' visual range, Dr. Vkr'lak said, their translucent body pulsing with what Torres had come to recognize as excitement. Was it auditory cues? Micro-expressions from the Vkr'lak delegation? Prior tactical assessment of probable attack vectors? Torres looked up from her coffee. Real coffee. Not the synthetic stuff most alien species thought humans could tolerate. I saw the shooter's reflection in Ambassador Vkr'lak's ceremonial headpiece. Dr. Vkr'lak deflated slightly, their body becoming more opaque. Disappointment, Torres guessed. Oh, that's mundane? I was going to say practical, Captain Torres. Call me Alexis. If you're going to be following me around analyzing my every move, We might as well be on a first-name basis. Very well, Alexis. Dr. Vrel seemed to test the name, their vocal apparatus making the S sound slightly elongated. And you may call me Vrel. My species doesn't use honorifics among colleagues. Torres, Alexis, nodded, taking another sip of her coffee. So, Vrel, what exactly is your job here? To explain to the Galactic Council that humans aren't actually bloodthirsty war monkeys? A crude but not entirely inaccurate summation. Vrel's cilia rippled in what might have been amusement. The Galactic Council is perplexed by human combat reflexes. Most sentient species evolve to either flee from danger or enter complex social negotiations to defuse it. Humans are somewhat unique in their instinct to immediately counterattack, often at great personal risk. We call it protecting people. Precisely. That's the fascinating part. Vrel's entire body seemed to light up from within. Other species protect their young, of course, but humans extend that protective instinct to, well, practically anyone. Even complete strangers. Even members of other species. You yanked Ambassador Krill out of harm's way without a moment's hesitation, despite the fact that his exoskeleton would likely have absorbed much of the impact. His exoskeleton wouldn't have done squat against the toxin inside that projectile. But you couldn't have known about the toxin at that moment. Alexis shrugged. I knew someone was shooting at him. That's generally bad news regardless of the specifics. Vrel's body pulsed rapidly. Remarkable. You made a split-second decision to protect another being, without conscious deliberation about survival probabilities or species-specific vulnerabilities. This is exactly the behavior I've been studying. It's called not being an asshole, Alexis muttered into her coffee. Another uniquely human concept. The idea that failing to intervene makes one culpable. Most species have no concept of the bystander effect, because non-intervention is their default state. Alexis stared at the alien researcher. Are you telling me that if you saw someone about to get hurt and you could stop it, you just wouldn't? Vrel's cilia flattened against their body. Embarrassment? Defensiveness? My species would assess the situation, calculate probable outcomes, evaluate social hierarchies and cultural protocols, and then perhaps alert the proper authorities. By which point the bad thing has already happened. Statistically speaking, immediate intervention often escalates situations rather than resolving them. Tell that to Ambassador Krill's intact skull. Vrel's translucent body rippled. This is why the Galactic Council needs to understand humans better. Your species operates on a completely different risk assessment paradigm. You see inaction as potentially more dangerous than action. Because it often is. Alexis stood, putting her empty coffee mug in the small sink of the embassy break room. Look, I appreciate that you're trying to explain humans to the rest of the galaxy, but I've got work to do. There are 7 different diplomatic functions this week, and after yesterday, security needs to be airtight. Excellent. I'll observe your security preparations. The proactive nature of human threat assessment is a key component of my research. Alexis sighed. Fine, but stay out of the way, and if I tell you to do something, like duck, do it without asking questions. Of course. Vrel seemed to straighten, their cilia standing at attention, though I should note that my species lacks the muscular structure to duck in the traditional sense. We can, however, rapidly decrease our density and become nearly transparent, which serves a similar function in avoiding projectiles. Great, do that then. The process takes approximately 7.2 seconds to initiate. Alexis pinched the bridge of her nose. Maybe just stay behind me. Lieutenant Jackson Daniels was not having a good day. First, the diplomatic incident with the Vkr'lak. Then the mountain of paperwork explaining why breaking 3 of an ambassador's appendages was justified. Now, he was staring at what appeared to be a floating jellyfish following his captain around like an eager puppy. So, they're studying us? Jackson asked, keeping his voice low as he and Alexis reviewed the security plans for the upcoming Galactic Unity Ball. Apparently, the way humans react to threats is fascinating and unprecedented in galactic society, Alexis replied, marking another potential vulnerability on the holographic blueprint. They make it sound like we're the weird ones for not wanting to see people get their heads blown off. According to Vrel, most species' first instinct is to save themselves, not others. The fact that we'll put ourselves in danger for strangers is apparently evolutionary nonsense. Jackson snorted. Have they met the Grecs? Those 4-armed bastards will rip your throat out if you look at their egg clutches wrong. Protective instinct for offspring is universal. Protective instinct for anyone else. Apparently not so much. Huh. Jackson marked another entry point as needing additional security. So what's the deal with the good doctor? Are they just going to follow you around taking notes on the violent monkey woman? More or less. Admiral Ulara thinks having an expert on humans will help smooth things over with the Council. The same council that keeps inviting species that want to assassinate each other to the same parties? The very same. Jackson shook his head. Politics. Politics, Alexis agreed. She glanced over to where Vrel was examining the security sensors with what appeared to be childlike fascination. They're not so bad, though. Genuinely seems to want to understand humans. Even defended us to the Admiral, apparently. Still weird being studied like some kind of exotic lab specimen. Tell me about it. Yesterday they asked me to explain why humans find it necessary to protect their friends with physical force. I told them about the time you broke that guy's nose in the academy when he was harassing Zoe. Jackson winced. Not my finest diplomatic moment. Vrel seemed to think it was perfectly logical once I explained the concept of friendship. Apparently, their species forms intellectual bonds, but not emotional ones. Sounds lonely. I think they'd say it sounds peaceful. Jackson looked thoughtful for a moment. You know what's strange? Most of these alien species have been spacefaring for thousands of years longer than us. They've had all this time to figure out how to get along, and they're still trying to poison each other at cocktail parties. Vrel says that's because most species never evolved past their initial survival instincts. They just developed technology to accommodate those instincts rather than changing them. And humans? Alexis shrugged. Vrel has this theory that humans evolved in such a high-threat environment that we had to develop complex social cooperation just to survive. Apparently, Earth is some kind of death trap compared to most homeworlds. Wait till they hear about Australia. I already told them. They've been researching it obsessively. Asked me yesterday if it was true that even human children in Australia can identify and avoid the 17 most deadly spider species. Jackson laughed. What did you tell them? I may have exaggerated slightly for the sake of galactic human reputation. Their conversation was interrupted by a soft chiming sound, Vrel's communication device. The Ardelian researcher excused themselves to take the call in the hallway, their body pulsing with what Alexis had come to recognize as concern. 20 credits says that's trouble, Jackson muttered. No bet. Nothing good ever comes from urgent calls in this line of work. Sure enough, when Vrel returned, their normally translucent body had darkened considerably, the Ardelian equivalent of a human going pale. Captain Torres, Alexis, I've just received concerning intelligence. The Galactic Unity Ball may be targeted by multiple factions. Alexis straightened immediately. What factions? What's their objective? The intelligence is fragmented, but it appears both the Vkr'lak and the Vordax Consortium have operatives planning to disrupt the event. Jackson swore under his breath. The Vkr'lak I get, they're still pissed about yesterday. But the Vordax? What's their angle? Vrel's cilia flattened against their body. The Vordax Consortium has been vocal about their opposition to human inclusion in galactic affairs. They believe your species represents a destabilizing influence. Because we don't let ambassadors get assassinated at buffet lines? Alexis asked dryly. Because humans have accomplished in 50 years of space travel what took most species centuries. Your rapid technological adaptation and integration into galactic society is unsettling to conservative factions. Jackson snorted. They're scared of us. With reason, Vrel said quietly. Most species who encountered the technological gap you overcame did not survive the experience. That silenced both humans momentarily. So what exactly are we looking at? Alexis finally asked. Assassination attempts? Bombing? Biological agents? Unknown. My contact could only confirm that both factions have moved significant resources to this station in the past 24 hours. The Vkr'lak ambassador has cancelled his attendance, which is unusual. He's creating an alibi, Jackson said. Alexis nodded. All right. We need to enhance security, but quietly. If we show our hand, they'll just postpone whatever they're planning. The Council will not approve canceling the event, Vrel warned. The Unity Ball is meant to showcase galactic cooperation. Canceling it would be seen as politically problematic. Of course it would, Alexis muttered. Heaven forbid politics take a back seat to not getting people killed. Welcome to galactic diplomacy, Jackson said with a grim smile. Alexis turned to Vrel. Can your research wait? I need every available person on security detail, and you know more about most of these species than we do. Vrel's body pulsed with what might have been pride. I would be honored to assist, though I should warn you, my species is not known for our combat capabilities. I don't need you to fight. I need you to help us understand who might. Cultural insights, behavioral patterns, anything that might help us identify threats before they materialize. That, Captain Torres, is precisely what I've spent my career studying. The Galactic Unity Ball was, objectively speaking, ridiculous. Hundreds of diplomatic representatives from across the galaxy, each wearing their species' equivalent of formal attire, which ranged from nearly invisible energy fields to elaborate constructions that resembled walking architecture more than clothing. The massive grand ballroom of Tranquility Station had been decorated with symbols from every member species. A nightmare of competing aesthetic principles that somehow resulted in a space that managed to be simultaneously gaudy and sterile. Alexis, resplendent in her diplomatic dress uniform, which she privately thought made her look like an over-decorated cruise ship employee, stood near one of the main entrances, scanning the crowd. Jackson was positioned at the opposite entrance, while their team of 12 security officers, a mix of humans and allied species, were strategically dispersed throughout the event. "Anything?" she murmured into her discreet communicator. "Nothing obvious," came Jackson's reply, though the Mechtree ambassador's third assistant keeps touching his ceremonial sash in a way that's making me nervous. "That's a cultural tick," Vrel's voice cut in. They had insisted on a communicator of their own, despite Alexis's concerns about having a civilian on the security channel. The Mechtree adjust their sashes exactly 17 times during formal gatherings. It's a numerical ritual related to their reproductive cycles. There was a moment of silence before Jackson replied, "That's both helpful and way more information than I needed, Doc." Alexis bit back a smile. "Vrel, any other cultural behaviors we should be aware of? Anything that might help us distinguish between normal diplomatic weirdness and potential threats?" The Grex delegation will periodically emit high-pitched vocalizations that sound like distress calls. It's simply their way of clearing their secondary breathing apparatus. The Juvian representatives may appear to be consuming the decorative floral arrangements. This is permitted and expected. Oh, and the Drelb ambassador will likely shed his outer membrane approximately 2 hours into the event. This is not a security concern, though the resulting fluid is mildly caustic to human skin. "Noted," Alexis said, mentally adding avoid Drelb skin shedding to her list of priorities. "Anything else?" "Yes." Vrel's voice took on a more serious tone. "The Vordak's representatives have historically used unity events to make political statements. Their culture values what they call resonant demonstrations, essentially symbolic acts meant to represent larger political positions." "What kind of symbolic acts are we talking about?" Jackson asked. "Nothing immediately dangerous typically. Previous demonstrations have included releasing prohibited scent markers, displaying banned iconography, or performing restricted movement patterns." "So basically the galactic equivalent of mooning the principal at graduation," Alexis muttered. "I'm not familiar with that ceremonial practice, but if it represents a culturally offensive gesture designed to undermine authority, then yes." Alexis was about to respond when she noticed a slight disturbance near the refreshment area. A Vkr'lak delegate, not the ambassador, but a lower-ranking official, was engaged in what appeared to be a heated discussion with a representative from the Quillian delegation. "Eyes on the refreshment station," she murmured. "Vkr'lak and Quillian having words." "The Vkr'lak shouldn't even be here," Jackson replied. "Their ambassador cancelled, which means whoever did show up wanted to be here badly enough to defy their ambassador," Alexis noted. "Vrel, any insights?" There was a pause before Vrel responded. "The Vkr'lak representative is displaying agitation markers. The reddening of their sensory stalks indicates elevated emotional states. The Quillian appears to be in a formal defensive posture." "I'm moving closer," Alexis said, beginning to work her way through the crowd. "Jackson, keep your position." "Copy that." Alexis navigated the complex maze of alien diplomats, trying to appear casual while making a beeline for the potential disturbance. As she got closer, she could hear fragments of the conversation, translated through her earpiece. "Insult to the collective cannot stand," the Vkr'lak representative was saying, their vocalization sacs pulsing rapidly. "The Quillian hierarchy made no such accusation," the Quillian replied, their exoskeletal plates clicking in what Alexis recognized as agitation. "We merely suggested that certain interpretations of recent events might be premature. You implied Vkr'lak involvement in the attack on your ambassador." "We implied nothing. We stated facts." Alexis reached the edge of their conversation, just as the Vkr'lak's sensory stalks fully extended, a warning sign she recognized from her briefings. She stepped smoothly between the two diplomats. "Ambassador Krill sends his regards," she said to the Quillian representative. "He asked me to inform you that the cultural exchange documents have been processed." It was complete nonsense, but it did what she intended, interrupting the escalating tension. The Quillian's compound eyes swiveled toward her. "Captain Torres, how fortuitous. Perhaps you can clarify certain matters for our Vkr'lak colleague." "I'd be happy to discuss any diplomatic concerns," Alexis replied smoothly. "Though perhaps somewhere less crowded. The observation deck is quite lovely this time of evening." The Vkr'lak representative's sensory stalks quivered with what might have been suspicion. "This is a matter between our delegations, human." "Of course," Alexis nodded respectfully. "I merely thought, as Earth is a neutral party in this discussion, that my perspective might be valuable. But I understand if you prefer private discourse." It was a calculated move, appealing to the Vkr'lak's well-known pride in their diplomatic prowess, while simultaneously making it difficult for them to continue a confrontation without losing face. For a moment, the Vkr'lak seemed torn between options. Then their sensory stalks retracted slightly. "Perhaps another time, Captain Torres. I find I have other matters requiring my attention." With a formal gesture that Alexis knew carried barely concealed insult, the Vkr'lak representative withdrew, sliding away through the crowd. The Quillian representative's exoskeletal plates relaxed slightly. "A timely intervention, Captain." The representative was becoming agitated. "Just doing my job," Alexis replied. "Everything all right here?" "Indeed. Though I find it curious that the Vkr'lak would send a junior representative after their ambassador made such a point of boycotting the event." "Curious indeed," Alexis agreed, making a mental note to have the junior representative follow discreetly. "Please enjoy the rest of the evening, and don't hesitate to signal if you require assistance." As the Quillian moved away, Alexis touched her communicator. "Potential situation diffused for now. Jackson, can you have Officer Tran keep an eye on that Vkr'lak representative? Something feels off." "Already on it," Jackson replied. "And Captain, we've got Vordak's movement by the eastern entrance. 3 representatives just arrived together, which breaks with their usual protocol of staggered entries." "I see them," Alexis replied, noting the distinctive iridescent robes of the Vordak's delegation. "Vrel, any insights?" "Their entry formation is indeed unusual." Vrel's voice came through, sounding concerned. "Vordaks typically maintain specific distance protocols even among their own delegation. A unified entry suggests a planned demonstration. What kind of demonstration should we expect?" "Uncertain. But Vordak's demonstrations are designed to transmit messages across multiple sensory spectrums simultaneously. Visual, auditory, olfactory." "Great," Alexis muttered. "So we're looking for the alien equivalent of a flash mob with smell-o-vision." "Not inaccurate," Vrel conceded. Alexis began making her way toward the Vordak's delegation, careful to maintain a casual pace. "I'm moving to intercept. Jackson, have Officers Lee and Khatri converge from opposite sides, but keep it subtle." "Copy that." The 3 Vordak's representatives had positioned themselves in what appeared to be a triangular formation near the center of the ballroom. Their iridescent robes seemed to pulse with subtle patterns that made Alexis's eyes water slightly when she looked directly at them. Before she could reach them, all 3 Vordaks simultaneously removed what appeared to be ceremonial cylinders from their robes. "Move!" Alexis barked into her communicator, breaking into a run. "Unknown devices, center of the ballroom!" The Vordaks raised the cylinders above their heads in perfect unison, and Alexis knew she wouldn't reach them in time. She changed tactics, shouting to the surrounding diplomats, "Everyone down, now!" Years of human war instinct compressed into a single moment. Every human in the room, security personnel and diplomatic staff alike, reacted instantaneously, pulling nearby aliens to the floor regardless of species, protocol, or the fact that some of them had exoskeletons that made ducking physically impossible. The Vordaks twisted the cylinders, and they erupted not with explosives or toxins, but with a dazzling display of light, accompanied by a harmonic resonance that vibrated through the floor in a released cloud of pheromones that made several species' sensory organs contract violently. It was, essentially, the galactic equivalent of setting off extremely obnoxious party poppers. Alexis, who had tackled a very surprised Ardelian diplomat, not Vrel, to the ground, looked up at the display with a mixture of relief and embarrassment. Across the room, Jackson had physically lifted a Mech-Tree representative out of harm's way. Officer Tran had formed a human shield over 2 Juvian delegates. Officer Lee had actually thrown herself over a decorative planter, apparently mistaking it for a small alien in the chaos. As the harmless, if disorienting display continued overhead, there was a moment of absolute silence in the ballroom. Then, as the humans began to realize they had essentially panic-tackled half the Galactic Diplomatic Corps to protect them from what amounted to space confetti, the silence turned awkward. Alexis slowly released the Ardelian diplomat, who blinked all 6 eyes in what might have been confusion or amusement. "My apologies," Alexis said formally, helping the diplomat back to their feet. "We detected unknown devices and acted according to security protocols." Around the room, other humans were making similar awkward explanations as they disentangled themselves from various alien representatives, some of whom seemed more puzzled than offended. The Vortex representatives, however, were clearly delighted by the chaos. Their sensory appendages vibrated with what Alexis recognized as their species' version of laughter. "Behold!" the central Vortex called out, their voice echoing through the translator systems. "See how the humans react. Violence is their first instinct. They cannot be trusted." "That was not violence," came a clear voice from across the ballroom. To Alexis's surprise, it was Vkr'lak, their translucent body now fully opaque with emotion. That was protection. The humans believed there was danger, and their first instinct was to shield others, not themselves. The Vortex representative's sensory appendages stopped vibrating. "They attacked peaceful diplomats! They violated physical boundaries without consent! They attempted to place their own bodies between perceived harm and others," Vkr'lak countered, drifting forward to the center of the room. Not a single human sought cover for themselves first. Observe the positioning. Each placed themselves to absorb the expected impact. A murmur went through the gathered aliens as many seemed to realize this was true. The humans had, without exception, moved to protect rather than escape. "A trained response," the Vortex representative argued. "Military conditioning." "Incorrect," Vkr'lak replied firmly. "I have studied human behavior extensively. This protective instinct exists in civilian humans as well. It is not training. It is inherent to their psychology." The Vortex seemed momentarily at a loss. This clearly wasn't how their demonstration was meant to go. Alexis stepped forward. "The Interspecies Diplomatic Corps apologizes for the overreaction. We assessed a potential threat and responded according to our protocols." She looked directly at the Vortex delegation. "Our only goal was to ensure the safety of all representatives present." "A convenient explanation," the Vortex replied, but their sensory appendages had retracted slightly, a sign of uncertainty. "If I may," a new voice joined the conversation. It was the Ardelian diplomat Alexis had tackled. "I found the human response reassuring. Captain Torres moved me out of harm's way at potential risk to herself. Such behavior is uncommon in galactic society." Other voices began to join in, some expressing surprise, others curiosity, a few even appreciation for the human response. The Vortex demonstration, meant to showcase human aggression, was instead prompting a discussion about human protective instincts. In the midst of this unexpected debate, Alexis's communicator vibrated with an urgent signal from Jackson. "Captain," his voice came through, tense and low. "The Vkr'lak representative is gone. Officer Tran lost track of them during the commotion." Alexis felt her blood run cold. The Vortex demonstration was a distraction. "That's my guess. And there's more. The environmental sensors are picking up an unusual chemical signature in the ventilation system for the East Wing. That's where the primary power couplings for the station are housed." "Evacuation protocols now," Alexis ordered. "Priority 1. Get everyone to the emergency shuttles. Already coordinating with station security, but Captain, the East Wing will be sealed off in 3 minutes under automatic quarantine procedures. After that, we can't get in without a full hazmat team, which the station doesn't have on standby." Alexis looked across the ballroom, where the diplomatic corps was still engaged in heated discussion about human behavior. None of them aware that they might all be minutes away from a station-wide catastrophe. "I'm heading to the East Wing," she decided. "Get these people out." "Captain." "That's an order, Lieutenant. Execute evacuation protocols." Before Jackson could protest further, Alexis was already moving, slipping out of the ballroom and into the corridor beyond. She broke into a run once clear of the diplomatic gathering, heading for the East Wing access. To her surprise, she heard the distinctive sound of an Ardelian's movement close behind her. "Captain Torres!" Vkr'lak called. "I've accessed the station's environmental controls. The chemical signature is consistent with a Vkr'lak biological compound. If released into the life support systems, it could incapacitate most oxygen-breathing species within minutes. Why aren't you evacuating with the others? Alexis demanded, not slowing her pace. My species is immune to most Vkr'lak compounds. Our biological makeup is too dissimilar. That doesn't explain why you're following me instead of helping with the evacuation. Vrel somehow managed to keep pace, their cilia propelling them forward in an undulating motion. I believe my knowledge of Vkr'lak biology and technology may be useful. Also, I find myself curious about human behavior under acute stress conditions. You're studying me? Now? Alexis didn't have time to be properly outraged. Technically, I never stopped, Vrel admitted. The human approach to crisis management is fascinating. Yeah, I got that. Look, if you're coming, just stay behind me and do exactly as I say. And if something goes wrong, get yourself out. That's not a suggestion. Understood, Captain.